Commission. So here's an example where they added some dormers on the upper level, which is an appropriate addition. This next one also shows some dormers. And here's an addition to a house, and it was to the rear. It was a corner lot, so the left-hand side is the original house, but over on the far right, you've got looks like a car in the driveway. That was the addition to the house. And those are certainly appropriate additions to structures. We also had an unusual case come up in the old 6th Ward where they had an existing historic structure in green. They wanted to add a brand new structure, but they wanted it connected to the historic structure. So the white house is the new construction, but they made a connection at the very rear. And so they tried to build compatible new construction within the district, but the connecting piece to the historic structure is way back at the rear of the two houses. Now, we do have non-contributing structures in historic districts where they don't contribute to the historic fabric of the district. If you want to do an alteration to a non-contributing structure, you are required to have a certificate of appropriateness for changes to those non-contributing structures. We want to make sure that you are not altering the structure to an earlier or later time period. So we will review for those type revisions to non-contributing structures. Once again, we're not going to go in and look at the interior to the historic structure. There are some administrative approvals for alterations, meaning that we'll look at it and you don't have to go through the Historic Commission. So if you had an inappropriate door, let's say you had a metal door on a house and you were going to remove it and put back a door that's more in keeping with the historical character of the structure, that is something that we would just administratively approve. We don't want to cause delay in your permitting process. If you're removing synthetic exterior siding, like vinyl siding would be an example, and you're going back with more appropriate material, you won't need a certificate of appropriateness. If you, let's say you have some gingerbread on your house, or your house had gingerbread and you're going back to replace that gingerbread, that's not going to require a certificate of appropriateness. Just give us the documentation showing that that's what was there before. And then I've already talked about the reconstruction of a building after it was destroyed. A big change in the ordinance. If the old ordinance said that the materials that you need to replace would be wood for wood, if that's what your siding was, you had to replace for wood siding. We are now saying that it needs to be visually compatible. And we're also looking at from the public street side. We're not looking at the alleys, we're not looking through the backyard. So it's what we can visibly see from the street. And they need to be in a form and scale and texture when you replace it as what was there originally. I'm going to touch a little bit on design guidelines. And we have been working very hard on creating design guidelines for our historic districts. The thought was they would illustrate what the ordinance says in words. And we felt that it was a good tool to show people how you can go in and add on to your historic structures and maintain the integrity of your historic structures. There is one historic district, the old 6th Ward, that has design guidelines that are more restrictive than what we've done for the other historic districts. Old 6th Ward has some things that are mandatory. They are maintained. If you take off wood, you've got to replace it with wood. So they are not going to be using your hardy plank type material. Cementitious is the right term? Okay. So we will have that. We'll use the design guidelines, review certificate of appropriatenesses, so that will really be important. Now, all historic districts will have, they will have design guidelines. It's important to note that if the historic district doesn't come in with their design guidelines, then the city will go work with the neighborhood and will create design guidelines for the neighborhood if they're not created within 6 months of filing an application. Woodland Heights does not have design guidelines. We've not started working on the design guidelines for your community. We will work with you, but we'll come to the community and hold community meetings to make sure that we capture it the way the community wants. At the minimum level, it'll be an illustrative drawing of how you may make changes to buildings, similar to most of the other historic districts. If this historic district want them to be more stringent, we will work with you to make sure that they're more stringent. The ultimate vote for approval of design guidelines will come, though, through the City Council. The ordinance does allow for demolition of contributing structures within a historic district, but it needs to be because of unusual and compelling circumstances or an unreasonable economic hardship. So that will really be important. There's a lot of information that you need to submit. We need a certified appraisal of the property. We're going to look at the assessed value. We're going to look at prior appraisals. We're going to look to see if you've tried to sell it on the market, what potential reuse for the building is. We're going to look at information such as if you go in and you restore this building, are you financially upside down? I mean, that's going to really be important in making the decision as we go forward on this certificates for demolition request. The Historic Commission has approved 2 or 3 demolition of historic structures this past summer. One of them, it wasn't the fault of the owner. They bought the structure to go in and rehab, but they found out that somebody had taken out a load-bearing wall. And it had been that way for many years and opened up the upstairs, and people were living upstairs on top of that. So the whole structure was actually caving in from the inside. So the commission approved that one. And then there was another one in the old 6th Ward where the owner had tried for several years to save the structure and just couldn't. And so they approved that one as well. The 90-day waiver certificate, let me talk a little bit about that. The old Historic Preservation Ordinance had a provision that if you came in for a certificate of appropriateness to do some alteration or new construction, if the Historic Commission said no, you could wait 90 days, and you could do whatever you want. That provision has been removed from the ordinance. So if you're in a historic district and the Historic Commission says, no, that's not an appropriate alteration or appropriate new construction for the district, then that is the end of the process. You no longer have the 90-day wait. However, you may file an appeal with the Houston Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission will listen to you. So you present your information to the Planning Commission. I understand some people thought you couldn't talk to the Planning Commission, and you can. So come up, it's a meeting, it's open to the public, present your case to the Planning Commission. They will either agree with the Historic Commission, or if they don't agree with the Historic Commission, then they can overturn the Historic Commission. Now, let's say the Planning Commission upholds the Historic Commission's decision. Then you may file an appeal with City Council. The citizens, when we worked on the ordinance, we heard that they did not want to go only to an appointed board. They wanted to have the ability to go to an elected board, and that was City Council. So City Council will be the final decision maker. It's a process that we call Rule 12. They will take a transcript of the Planning Commission meeting. They'll look at all of the documentation that was supplied to the Planning Commission, and then they'll make a decision. Let's talk about demolition of neglect, because I think there's some concern that the city's going to go out there. We're going to start issuing all sorts of fines and tickets on property owners. Our goal is always to get people into compliance with the ordinance. So if you're doing work without appropriate permits at the city, we go out and we tell you, stop, stop working. If you continue on, we'll do another stop work. But then, if you ignore us, that's when we get to the point of saying, okay, we're going to start issuing fines because you're ignoring us. On the demolition of neglect, we're really looking at things where the structure will make it unsound, where it will continue to deteriorate. So if the floor supports start going away, we want to see you at least repair them. If the building is open, let's say the chimney is falling off or your stucco's coming off the building and water is getting in and that's causing the building to deteriorate, we just want you to seal it and secure the building. It's our normal processes that the city goes through. We have neighborhood protection that gets involved in many instances. So we will refer any complaints about structures not being appropriately protected or sealed to the right departments. And in most cases, it'll either be neighborhood protection or code enforcement in public works and engineering. And I touched briefly about the fines under the ordinance, but let me say one thing. If you have a building right now that is not in compliance with the Historic Preservation Ordinance, we're not going to go back there and tell you you've got to repair it and change it and go back to the way it was. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. I'm going to skip slide 46, but I want to go to 47. There was a transition process that was adopted as part of the ordinance amendments. Existing historic districts and Houston Heights South have one process that they're going through, which is a reconsideration process. Glenbrook Valley, and as well as Woodland Heights, have not had any hearings at all. So we are going to go through the hearing process like we would for all of our other historic districts when they were created. So you're going to have a hearing in front of the Houston Archaeological Historic Commission, and then a hearing in front of the Planning Commission, and then to City Council. That is our plans. That's the old process, and that was preserved. So on November 18th is our hearing in front of the Houston Archaeological and Historic Commission on your district designation process. I understand we've received some support since the district was filed. We've also had some retractions that have come in. What we will do at that meeting is we will key in the information, we will determine the support. If the district falls under 51% support, we will modify the boundaries to achieve 51% support, and then we will hold the hearing. When we hold the hearing, that is the end, and close the hearing, that is the end of the retraction and adding more support letters. The 51% support is only so that we can hold a hearing, because the Historic Commission needs to determine whether this district meets the criteria in the ordinance. And so once they make that decision, if they say yes, then you will be referred on to the Houston Planning Commission. Do you have the slide showing the district boundary? There you go. That is your proposed district boundary.
Can you explain the support or not support? Who expresses support and how do you do it?
When you create a historic district, the old process, when you created a historic district, property owners signed a petition. And it required, in order to file the application, you needed 51% of the property owners representing 51% of the land area within the